Hello, welcome. This is Kogi Tui, and today I'm going to talk about an unexplainable thing or dream that I dreamt once. One day, a young modern man who thought himself to have descended from ancient kings took his staff and went down to view their farm down closer to a spring of a stream. He went slowly holding his staff like an old man does walking down a path that is slippery to avoid injury and to support himself. Once at the end of the farm and closer to the spring, he sat on a stone just next to their well, and he took off his shoes and he gazed towards the east direction, the direction of the rising sun. And lo, behold, he saw an ancient tree shrub, probably several hundred years old. He took note and then suddenly felt an internal coldness, and he put on his shoes and walked back to the farmhouse as fast as he could, together with his supporting staff. When he reached the farmhouse, the internal coldness persisted, and he had to change his farm clothes and put on his clean clothes and head back to the town where they lived. He felt weak inside. A voice told him that he had messed up big time. The voices began to be more audible and multiply in such a manner that it was no longer a still small voice, the conscious voice alone, but even the voices of other spiritual beings, which he could not tell apart which was which. His body suddenly grew weak and he could not walk back home to the town, so he hired a border service to take him home so that he can sleep even if it was daytime, and hopefully wish away his acute malaise and lessen the growing voices now in his head. Once he reached his destination, he headed straight to his bed and slept, but the voices grew louder, and they started giving the young man conflicting commands to follow, lest he die, and the orders were extremely conflicting in such a manner that he could not carry out any of the demand without upsetting the other parties, so he decided to stay put and wait for the final verdict. Anyway, before he decided to stay put, he had tried several commands which he felt made sense, but each time he executed the demands, he received a bashing from the conflicting party, and the bashing was so strong because it was composed of voices that cried out that he would die that same day. And to die did he die. Before then, he had carried out a scientific experiment on himself, as was usual, with three components that I won't disclose here, seeing that the world is a small global village where rumors and facts travel faster than light. Also, for the fact that the young man, by his own account, saw an affidavit that the saying that the walls have ears is a fact, for he attested that these walls of stone could carry out several terabytes of recorded voices. By his own account, everything that he had ever said was laid bare on the heavenly trial, and he froze with guilt. Furthermore, everything he had ever written or drawn was copied in the heavenly court offices and duly signed by his own signature and logos, such that he could not plead and allege that the copies therein were forgeries. The evidence was overwhelming, and many voices cried for justice, especially women voices saying, "Crucify him! Let him be thrown into the sea of fire." And into the sea of fire he was thrown, for it was not the heavenly judge that judged him, but he judged himself guilty, and he was thrown into the sea of fire. Once in the sea of fire, he trembled with great trembling, acute fear that ever did he experience as his flesh burned. No, actually became molten instantly. His spirit and soul were taken from him by magical hands, and he fell into an empty space that held the sea of fire and brimstone. Therein, in the empty space, with no body but with a spirit and a soul, he met the potter. The potter was a woman whom he recognized from tales he had heard when he was a little boy. "Young man, why do you condemn yourself and pity others but yourself?" asked the potter. But the young man could not answer, for he was still shaking from fear he had experienced as he descended deeply through the sea of fire. "What do you want?" asked the woman. And the young man answered, "A new body, a new life." And the woman took some clay and fashioned a new body for him, and he then drew him out through the other side into another world. He also had a chance to narrate to me of one folly he had seen. He saw that a long time ago, when all living things were animals and plants on land, the birds had conspired to lock out the creeping animals from ever going into heaven. This they had done by conspiring with the dinosaurs that could see the promised land from afar. The way to the promised land has been destined to be through the 3 trees that lay before the great mountain. There lay a butcher who would sacrifice the animal and give it a new body that the soul could fly with and the animal could soar into heaven. But before then, since all animals crept from the sea where life began, they came out creeping and had to undergo evolution along their journey to the 3 trees that lay near the great mountain, so that all could enter into heaven. However, not all animals came out of the sea creeping. Some, like the Egyptian crows, came out with wings. Also the dinosaurs had come out as dinosaurs, fully evolved, and also one huge human being had come out as a human being. It was he that became the butcher or priest that lay in wait beneath the 3 gigantic trees that were the way into heaven. Also the worms and the stinging caterpillar had come out as the first to come out from the sea and made it to the trees of life, the tree of knowledge, the tree to heaven. But the butcher had warned them that they must wait on all to pass through, for they were to be the last to enter heaven. However, the stinging caterpillar and the descendants of the worms had not been happy about the pronouncement, and they slowly sought to recruit other beings to help them reach heaven as soon as possible. Thereby they had sought the help of the dinosaur, the chameleon, and the crow, that was also to wait for all other birds to pass through. They soon enlisted the help of the eagle, and since the eagle could fly and see the promised land high up in the heavens, together with the dinosaurs, they could see the future, and therefore they could fasten the evolution of their kinds coming from the sea of origin of life. It was one day that they conspired to lock out the creeping animals like the tortoise and the snake, who also had made to the tree, but being fully evolved, they had to wait for their creeping kind come and go before them, and both had agreed together with the gecko and the vulture and the marabou stork, and this made for another league. Since the first league of the crow had an added advantage of seeing into the future, they had fastened the evolution of their kind, and all that remained was the day of mutiny. That day came when they were enough crows and eagles to block the light of the sun. When they did that, the giant human butcher could not see, and that's when they overturned the tables, where the chameleon ate the worm, where the dinosaur ate the stinging caterpillar, and when the sunlight came back, the crows and eagles flew to the giant human butcher, accusing the moon of blocking the sunlight, which is the first solar eclipse. But since the eagle could see through the darkness, they convinced the human butcher that it was the snake and the vultures that had eaten the compatriots, worm and caterpillar. The giant human was infuriated by what transpired, and he asked the snake, "Did you eat the original worm?" And the snake, having been terrified by the time there was intense darkness in the middle of the day, he stammered and froze with guilt. Then the giant human asked the vulture, "Did you eat the stinging caterpillar as the crow averse?" And he too stammered and froze with guilt, for when there was darkness, he could not use the thermal currents to help him soar closer to the soar of the eagle. And so the human giant gave both of them severe punishment. The snake was to crawl forever, and the vulture was to eat rotten carrion. For by this mistake, death had entered the perfect nature. However, no sooner had he meted his severe punishment to both, and gotten angry and uprooted the tree of life and the tree of heaven, he saw the chameleon vomiting the worm, and out came the stinging caterpillar from the dinosaur, and he repented himself and gave both punishment, for the chameleon were to eat insects and flies for their meal, but the dinosaur, since it had seen the future, it could never enter that future, as it were so glorified. The eagle was given the punishment of living in high tops and sweating out for his meals by having to descend to the ground to take his meals. When the Creator of all came, he rendered a severe punishment to the giant human, that his descendants would be way too shorter than him, and that they would not live for long as he could. He was also not to be seen by his kind, and therefore the Creator took him away. The rest, as they say, is history. Thank you very much.